Every afternoon, Alexander pressed his face against the cold iron bars of his father's estate, his single leg trembling with the effort as he watched children his age laugh, run, and play in a world he couldn't reach. The day Matilda Carson marched straight to the gate, stared directly into his eyes, and extended her small hand through the bars would shatter his carefully controlled existence forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Every day at precisely 3:45 p.m., Alexander Reed Hamilton watched from behind the iron gates as children streamed out of Westbrook Elementary School. Their laughter carried across the carefully manicured lawn of the Hamilton estate, floating through the air like dandelion seeds. Light, carefree, and completely beyond his reach. Alexander didn't attend Westbrook Elementary. He didn't attend school at all. When you're the only child of Nathaniel Hamilton, the reclusive tech billionaire whose security protocols rivaled those of small nations, the world came to you instead. Today, Alexander perched on his customized wheelchair at his usual observation spot, partially hidden behind the ornate gate's stone pillar. He could have used his crutches, but the uneven ground near the fence made balance precarious. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the pavement where children played an impromptu game of tag, their backpacks abandoned in colorful heaps. Alexander absently rubbed the phantom itch where his right leg should have been. The osteosarcoma had taken it just above the knee 3 years ago when he was 8. The cancer was gone now, but so was the life he might have had. A normal life, with friends and school buses and playground games. Young Master Alexander came the familiar voice of Greta, his father's head of household staff. Your tutor is waiting in the library. Mathematics today. Alexander didn't turn around immediately. A girl had caught his attention, someone new. She wore a yellow dress that seemed to capture all the remaining summer light, and her dark curly hair bounced as she skipped. Unlike the others, she'd noticed him watching. Instead of the usual quick glance and whisper to friends that Alexander had grown accustomed to, she stared back with unabashed curiosity. One moment, please, he told Greta, unable to look away from this strange girl who didn't seem to know she was supposed to pretend not to see him. To his astonishment, the girl in yellow broke away from her friends and walked directly to the gate. Alexander's heart hammered in his chest. No one had ever approached him before. Hi, she said, her voice clear and confident. I'm Matilda. Are you the ghost boy everyone talks about? Alexander blinked in surprise. Ghost boy? All the kids say a pale boy watches us from behind this gate. Some say you're a ghost. She tilted her head, examining him. But ghosts don't use wheelchairs, do they? Despite himself, Alexander laughed. It felt strange, like exercising an unused muscle. No, I don't think they do. Young Master, Greta insisted, her voice tighter now. Your father's instructions were quite clear about interactions with 5 minutes. Alexander pleaded without looking back. Just 5 minutes, Greta. There was a pause, then a resigned sigh. 5 minutes. Not 1 second more. The girl, Matilda, grinned through the bars. So you're not a ghost. You're a prisoner. I'm not a prisoner, Alexander protested, though the words felt hollow even to him. I'm homeschooled. My father says it's safer. Safer than what? The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Alexander had never questioned his father's protectiveness. After his mother's death in the car accident when he was 4, after the cancer that nearly took his life, his father's fear made a certain kind of sense. The world was dangerous, especially for the son of one of the richest men in the country. But looking into Matilda's curious eyes, the justification suddenly seemed less absolute. I'm Alexander, he said, instead of answering her question. Alexander Reed Hamilton. That's a lot of name, Matilda observed. Do they call you Alex? Or Xander? Or something cool like Hammer? Alexander smiled again, surprised at how easily it came with her. Just Alexander. Well, just Alexander, you should come out and play sometime. We're doing Capture the Flag tomorrow after school. The suggestion was so impossible, so wonderful, that Alexander felt a physical ache in his chest. Can't, because of your leg? Matilda asked, glancing at the empty space below his right knee. There was no pity in her voice, only practical inquiry. No, Alexander said, straightening in his wheelchair. I have crutches, and a prosthetic, though I don't always wear it. It's just ... Complicated. Complicated like your dad won't let you. Or complicated like you're secretly a prince and hiding from assassins. This time Alexander's laugh came naturally. The first one. Matilda's expression turned serious. That's too bad. We could use someone with good observation skills on our team. You've been watching us play for weeks. You probably know all our strategies by now. The knowledge that she had noticed him long before today made Alexander's cheeks warm. The team with Jaden always puts their flag behind the big slide, he offered. And, Emma can't run and hold the flag at the same time. She always drops it. Single quotes. Matilda's eyes widened. See? You'd be perfect. She glanced over her shoulder as someone called her name. I have to go, but I'll be back tomorrow same time. I might not be here, Alexander said, though he knew it was a lie. Where else would he be? Yes, you will. Matilda said it with such certainty that Alexander couldn't argue. Bye. Just Alexander. She ran back to her waiting friends, her yellow dress a beacon against the graying afternoon. Alexander watched until she disappeared around the corner, feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his careful world. That's 5 minutes, Greta said gently, and your father will be calling in an hour to check on your progress. As Alexander wheeled himself back toward the mansion, he couldn't stop thinking about Matilda's invitation. Capture the flag. Teams, the kind of normal childhood activity that existed for him only through books in the window of his father's limousine. In the cavernous library, Dr. Phillips waited with geometric equations and patient smiles. Alexander went through the motions, solving problems and answering questions, but his mind kept drifting to the girl in yellow and her simple question, safer than what? That evening, dinner was served on the East Terrace as usual. Alexander and his father ate in silence, punctuated only by the clink of silverware and occasional comments about Alexander's studies. Nathaniel Hamilton was a tall, imposing figure even when seated, his sharp features accentuated by prematurely silver hair and perpetually tired eyes. Dr. Phillips tells me you were distracted today, his father finally said, studying Alexander over the rim of his water glass. Alexander carefully cut his salmon into perfect squares. I was watching the children from Westbrook. His father's sigh was heavy with an emotion Alexander couldn't quite name. Alexander, we've discussed this. Your curiosity is natural, but I spoke with one of them today. Alexander interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. A girl named Matilda. His father's fork paused midway to his mouth. You spoke with her? From the gate, I assume? Yes, she came up to me. Alexander looked directly at his father, something he rarely did during these conversations. She invited me to play capture the flag tomorrow. The flash of panic in his father's eyes was quickly masked, but not before Alexander caught it. Out of the question, Nathaniel said, his tone final. You know why we've arranged your life this way, Alexander? After everything that's happened, I know about the kidnapping attempts after Mom died, Alexander said quietly. And I know about the reporters who tried to sneak onto the property when I was sick, but Dad, that was years ago. The world hasn't changed, his father said, his voice softening slightly. People see our wealth and they want a piece of it one way or another. I promised your mother I would keep you safe, but is this living? The question escaped before Alexander could consider its impact. Being safe behind gates? Watching other kids play? His father put down his fork, his expression clouded. For a moment, Alexander thought he might actually consider the question. Instead, Nathaniel straightened and adjusted his tie, a nervous habit that signaled the conversation was over. We have everything we need right here, he said. Your education is superior to anything you'd receive at that public school. Your medical care is the best money can buy. Why risk that for a game of capture the flag? Because I'm lonely, Alexander wanted to say. Because maybe having everything isn't the same as having what matters. But the words stuck in his throat. I have some calls to make, his father announced, rising from the table. Harrison will help you with anything you need. As his father disappeared into the house, Alexander stared out at the sprawling garden that was his kingdom and his cage. Tomorrow, Matilda would return to the gate expecting to see him. She would ask again and he would have to say no, unless he didn't. The thought came unbidden, dangerous and thrilling. What if, for once, he didn't follow the carefully prescribed routine? What if just once he chose something for himself? As the sun set over the Hamilton estate, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow at 3:45 p.m., he wouldn't be behind the gate watching. He would be on the other side. Sleep eluded Alexander that night. He lay in his vast bedroom, staring at the glow. In the dark constellations his mother had painstakingly arranged on his ceiling years ago. Orion, Ursa Major, Cassiopeia, silent witnesses to his forbidden plan. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Matilda's bright smile and heard her casual invitation. You should come out and play sometime. How long had it been since he'd actually played with another child? Not the structured, supervised socialization experiences his father occasionally arranged with the children of business associates, but real play, spontaneous and unrehearsed. By morning, Alexander had formulated a plan so simple it was almost elegant. His father was flying to Seattle for a board meeting. He would leave after breakfast and return late tomorrow evening. That left only the household staff to circumvent, and Alexander knew their routines better than anyone. You seem cheerful today, his father commented over breakfast, looking up from his tablet. Alexander shrugged, careful not to appear too animated. Dr. Phillips promised we'd start on astronomy this afternoon. You know how much I like space. Quotes his father's expression softened, just like your mother. He checked his watch. I should be back by dinner tomorrow. We can video chat tonight. Have a good trip, Alexander said, and meant it. His father wasn't a villain in some Victorian novel locking him away out of cruelty. He was just a man broken by grief and fear, trying to hold on to the one precious thing he had left. After seeing his father off, Alexander went through his morning lessons with unusual focus, answering every question correctly and completing his assignments ahead of schedule. You're quite motivated today, Dr. Phillips observed, his bushy eyebrows raised in gentle surprise. Just trying to make my father proud, Alexander replied, the half-truth coming as Oli. At precisely 3:15 p.m., Alexander asked Harrison, his afternoon attendant, for privacy while he took his bath. This was routine. Alexander had insisted on bathing himself since turning 10, a small independence he'd fought hard to win. What wasn't routine was what Alexander did next. Instead of running the bath, he quickly changed into the most normal clothes he owned, jeans that had been altered to accommodate his prosthetic and a plain blue t-shirt without designer labels. He attached his prosthetic leg with practice movements, then grabbed his crutches as backup. The prosthetic was excellent for walking on flat surfaces, but he wasn't sure what terrain he might encounter during Capture the Flag. His heart thundered as he eased open his bedroom window. Thankfully, his room was on the ground floor. His father had relocated him after the amputation to eliminate the need for stairs. The gardeners were always on the east side of the property on Tuesdays, and security focused on the main entrance. This window faced the south garden, which butted up against the property's edge. Alexander lowered himself carefully onto the soft grass below, half expecting alarms to sound. When nothing happened, he took his first unsupervised step off the Hamilton property in over 3 years. The gap in the hedge was smaller than he remembered from his exploratory walks with Greta. He had to turn sideways to squeeze through, and for one panicked moment he thought he might get stuck. Then suddenly he was through, standing on the public sidewalk that ran alongside Westbrook Elementary. Freedom tasted like autumn air and possibilities. Alexander checked his watch, 3:40 p.m., right on schedule. He made his way toward the school playground, each step away from the estate both terrifying and exhilarating. Children began streaming out of the building just as he arrived. Alexander positioned himself near a bench, trying to appear casual as if he belonged. His stomach knotted with anxiety. What if Matilda didn't come? What if she'd forgotten about him? Worse, what if she had only been playing a joke? Then he saw her, the yellow dress replaced by jeans and a bright green sweater, but her curly hair unmistakable. She was walking with 2 other girls, laughing about something. Alexander froze, suddenly unsure. The courage that had carried him over the wall evaporated, but Matilda looked up and saw him. Her eyes widened and the most genuine smile spread across her face. She said something to her friends and jogged over to where Alexander stood. "You came?" she exclaimed, as if his presence was the most natural thing in the world. "And you're not behind the gate?" "I'm not," Alexander agreed, unable to suppress his own smile. "I'm here for capture the flag, if the offer still stands." "Of course it stands. Come on, I'll introduce you to everyone." She turned to lead him to the playground, then paused. "Wait, can you? I mean, with your ... single quotes I can play," Alexander said firmly. "I might be a little slower, but I can do it." Matilda nodded, no pity in her eyes, just acceptance. "Cool. You can be on my team. I'm captain today." The next few minutes were a blur of introductions. Jaden, Emma, Zach, Lily, Diego, names attached to curious faces. Some looked at his prosthetic leg, others at his crutches, which he'd brought along just in case, but none made it the center of their attention. "This is Alexander," Matilda announced. "He's on our team. He knows all the other team's secrets because he's been watching us play." "Like a spy?" Diego asked, eyes lighting up. "Strategic analyst," Alexander corrected with unexpected confidence. "I know that your team always puts the flag behind the slide and Emma drops it when she runs." Emma's mouth fell open. "How did you?" "Told you he was observant," Matilda said with satisfaction. "Alexander, you'll guard our flag. You can see everything from defense position." As the teams separated to begin the game, a tall boy with red hair approached. "You're the kid from the mansion, aren't you?" he asked, his tone somewhere between accusatory and awed. "The Hamilton place." Alexander tensed. "Yes, my dad works for the security company that installed your systems," the boy continued. "He says your dad is paranoid, Luke." Matilda cut in sharply. "Don't be rude," Luke shrugged. "Just saying what my dad says." He looked Alexander up and down. "Can you even play with that leg?" Before Alexander could respond, Matilda stepped between them. "He can do anything you can do, Luke Carter, and he's smarter than you, so watch out." Luke rolled his eyes but backed off. "Whatever. Game starts in 2 minutes." As he walked away, Alexander turned to Matilda. "You didn't have to defend me, I know," she said simply. "But friends stand up for each other. That's the rule. Friends." The word settled warmly in Alexander's chest. He'd read about friendship in books, seen it depicted in films, but experiencing it firsthand was something entirely different. The game began with a shrill whistle blast from Jaden. Alexander took his position guarding the flag, which Matilda had cleverly tucked into the branches of a small tree, not behind the slide like the other team always did. From his vantage point, Alexander could see everything. When Luke tried to sneak around the back of the playscape, Alexander called out a warning to Zach. When Emma made her predictable dash for their territory, he directed Lily to intercept. His strategic mind, honed by years of chess and military history books, translated perfectly to the playground battle. Halfway through the game, disaster struck. In his excitement at spotting Diego closing in on the enemy flag, Alexander took a step backward and his prosthetic caught on a tree. He fell hard, pain shooting through his residual limb as the prosthetic twisted awkwardly. For a moment he lay there, humiliation washing over him. This was why his father kept him isolated. This was why he didn't belong in the normal world. He waited for the laughter, the pointing, the pity. Instead, he felt hands helping him up. Matilda on one side and surprisingly Luke on the other. "You okay?" Luke asked gruffly. "That looked like it hurt." "I'm fine," Alexander said automatically, though his leg was throbbing. "Your robot leg came loose," a kindergartner named Mia observed, pointing at where the prosthetic had partially detached. "It's not a robot leg," Matilda corrected. "It's a prosthetic, and Alexander needs to sit down and fix it." They helped him to the bench. Alexander's cheeks burned as he began adjusting the prosthetic. This was mortifying. A public display of his difference, his weakness. But then Matilda sat beside him. "While you fix that, want to tell us where we should position everyone for the next round?" Luke's team is getting desperate. Just like that, his difference became secondary to his contribution. The other children gathered around, waiting for his strategic input, treating the prosthetic adjustment as casually as if he were tying a shoelace. "They'll be guarding their flag more heavily now," Alexander said, finding his voice again. "So we need a diversion." As he outlined his plan, the throbbing in his legs subsided, replaced by a different sensation, belonging. For the first time in years, Alexander wasn't defined by what what he had lost or what made him different. He was defined by what he could offer, by the connections he was making. When the game resumed, Alexander switched to his crutches, finding them more stable on the uneven ground. And when Matilda executed his diversion plan perfectly, allowing Zach to capture the enemy flag, the victory cheer that erupted included his name. For one perfect afternoon, Alexander Reed Hamilton wasn't the lonely billionaire's son with one leg. He was just Alexander, strategic genius, and captured the flag champion. The moment Alexander climbed back through his bedroom window, reality crashed down upon him like a wave. The pristine silence of the Hamilton estate felt oppressive after the joyful chaos of the playground. He quickly changed back into his regular clothes, hiding his grass-stained jeans at the bottom of his hamper. His heart was still racing with exhilaration when Harrison knocked on his door. "Young master, is everything all right? Your bath was rather lengthy today." "Fine, Harrison," Alexander called, hoping his voice sounded normal. "Just enjoying the water." He'd made it back just in time. The throbbing in his residual limb reminded him that his adventure hadn't been without cost, but the memory of Matilda's smile and the team's victory cheer made the discomfort insignificant. At dinner, Alexander picked at his perfectly prepared salmon while half listening to Mrs. Winters, his evening tutor, discuss tomorrow's literature lesson. His mind was elsewhere, replaying moments from the afternoon. The feel of the autumn breeze on his face, the satisfying weight of the captured flag in his hand, the impromptu celebration when Zach had carried him on his shoulders after their victory. "Alexander, did you hear what I said?" Mrs. Winters peered at him over her glasses. "Sorry," he murmured, distracted. "Indeed. I asked if you'd finished the Dickens reading I assigned." "Yes, of course." He had finished it days ago, as he did all his assigned. What else was there to fill his time? Before today, that is. Later that evening, his father's face appeared on the large screen in Alexander's room for their scheduled video call. Nathaniel Hamilton looked tired, the hotel room lighting accentuating the lines around his eyes. "How was your day, son?" he asked, loosening his tie. Alexander hesitated. For as long as he could remember, he'd answered this question truthfully. His days were predictable, controlled, safe, but now a secret burned inside him, the exhilarating memory of freedom, friendship, and belonging. "It was good," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Dr. Phillips started our astronomy unit." His father smiled. "Your mother would have loved that. She always said you had her curiosity about the stars." Alexander nodded, guilt twisting in his stomach. He'd never lied to his father before, but was omission truly lying? And if it wasn't his father guilty of the same, keeping him locked away from experiences that made life worth living? "How's your leg today?" his father asked, the routine question part of their daily check-ins since the amputation. Alexander thought of the fall, the painful twist when his prosthetic caught on the tree roots. "Fine," he said. Another lie, or at least a partial truth. The pain was there, but it seemed irrelevant compared to what he'd gained. After the call ended, Alexander lay in bed staring at his ceiling stars again. Tomorrow his father would still be away. Tomorrow Matilda would expect him at the playground again. Tomorrow he would have to decide if one perfect afternoon was enough, or if he was brave enough to risk everything for more. Sleep came eventually, filled with dreams of running on two strong legs, of belonging somewhere outside the gilded cage of the Hamilton estate. Morning brought pain. Alexander winced as he attached his prosthetic, his residual limb tender from yesterday's activity. He hadn't used his legs so vigorously in months. The Hamilton Physical Therapy Room contained the best equipment money could buy, but all the carefully controlled exercises couldn't compare to the spontaneous movements of real play. "You're limping, doctor," Phillips observed during their morning session. "Did something happen?" "Just slept wrong," Alexander lied, hating how easily the falsehoods now came. "It'll be fine." By lunchtime, his leg was screaming at him. Alexander reluctantly switched to his wheelchair, knowing he'd never make it through another active afternoon on his prosthetic. Would the other children treat him differently in the chair? Would Matilda's acceptance waver? The anxiety built as 3:15 approached. This time, Alexander didn't need to create a diversion. Harrison was occupied with a minor crisis in the kitchen. A delivery of Alexander's specialized diet items had been mixed up, and the chef was having what Alexander's mother would have called a conniption fit. The escape was easier this time, the path through the hedge more familiar, but as he wheeled himself toward the playground, Alexander felt conspicuous in a way he hadn't on crutches. The wheelchair marked him as different in a way that couldn't be ignored. He almost turned back. Then he saw Matilda waiting at the edge of the playground, scanning the street. When she spotted him, her face lit up. She ran to meet him, seemingly unbothered by the wheelchair. "You came back? I wasn't sure you would." Her honesty was refreshing. "Is your leg okay?" "Just sore from yesterday," Alexander admitted. "I'm not used to so much activity." She nodded thoughtfully. "We're playing soccer today, but you can be the referee. Luke says you have a good eye for the rules." The mention of Luke surprised Alexander. "He said that?" Matilda grinned. "Well, what he actually said was that you're a no-it'll who probably memorized the rule book. But coming from Luke, that's practically a compliment." Alexander laughed, his anxiety ebbing. "I haven't actually memorized the soccer rules. That's okay. Neither have we. We just make them up as we go along." As they reached the playground, Alexander braced himself for awkward stares. Instead, he was greeted with casual waves and a few friendly "Hey, Alexander." Stiego ran over immediately. "Good timing. We need a ref who isn't biased. Zach keeps calling handball on everything." Just like that, Alexander was integrated into the game. The children arranged makeshift goals using backpacks and sweaters. Matilda found a clipboard in her backpack and ceremoniously presented it to Alexander enhancing his referee authority. From his position at midfield, Alexander called plays with growing confidence. The children accepted his decisions without question, even Luke, who grudgingly nodded when Alexander called him offside. Halfway through the game, a petite woman with curly hair like Matilda's approached the playground. She glanced curiously at Alexander before calling out, "Matilda, homework before playdate today, remember?" Matilda jogged over to the woman, clearly her mother, and engaged in an intense whispered conversation, complete with dramatic hand gestures. The woman looked over at Alexander several times, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern to something softer. Finally, Matilda bounced back, triumphant. "Mom says you can come over to our house if you want. We're having tacos for dinner and I have to do my math homework, but after that we could play Mario Kart. If you're allowed, I mean." Alexander's heart soared, then plummeted. A playdate, a normal childhood ritual he'd read about but never experienced, and yet impossible. How could he explain his absence to the staff? How could he contact his father for permission? The mansion might already be in an uproar over his disappearance. "Can't today," he said, the words bitter in his mouth. "But thank you for asking." Matilda looked disappointed but not surprised. "Because of your dad's rules?" "Yes," Alexander said, relieved she understood. She considered this for a moment. What if my mom talked to your dad? Adults always want to talk to other adults about everything. The thought of his father speaking with Matilda's mother sent a spike of panic through Alexander. "That wouldn't work," he said quickly. "My father is ... protective. He doesn't let me go anywhere without security." "Because you're rich?" Matilda asked bluntly. Alexander blinked at her directness. "Partly, and because I was sick. He's afraid something will happen to me." Matilda's mother approached, extending her hand to Alexander. "Hello there. I'm Elena Carson, Matilda's mom. She tells me you're new to the neighborhood?" Alexander shook her hand, surprised by how normal the interaction felt. "Alexander Hamilton, ma'am. I live ... single quotes." He hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward the direction of the estate. Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. "In the big house behind the stone wall? I think I've seen you watching the children sometime." Alexander nodded, embarrassed. "Yes, ma'am." Elena knelt beside his wheelchair, bringing herself to his eye level. There was something in her manner, a gentle directness, that reminded him of Matilda. "Well, Alexander, you're welcome at our house anytime. We're just 3 blocks down on Maple Street. The blue house with the red door." She smiled warmly. "I'd be happy to speak with your parents to arrange something official if that would help. It's just my dad," Alexander said quietly. "He's very busy. He travels a lot." Something in Elena's expression shifted, a flash of concern quickly masked. "I see. Well, the invitation stands. Matilda could use a friend who's as interested in strategy games as she is. She's been banned from family game night because none of us can beat her at Risk anymore." Matilda groaned. "Mom, that's embarrassing." Elena laughed, ruffling her daughter's hair. "It's not embarrassing to be good at something, Matilda. Now we really do need to get home for homework." She turned back to Alexander. "It was lovely meeting you, Alexander." As they walked away, Matilda called over her shoulder, "Same time tomorrow. We're doing relay races." Alexander nodded, a lump in his throat. The other children began dispersing too, called home by parents or the setting sun. Soon Alexander was alone on the playground, his heart full of contradictory emotion. He had been seen, truly seen, not as the lonely billionaire's son with one leg, but as Alexander, referee and potential friend. Elena Carson had looked at him and offered what his father's money couldn't buy: normal childhood experiences, a place at a dinner table with tacos instead of salmon fillets, video games and homework, and all the ordinary things he'd only observed from behind the gate. As Alexander wheeled himself back toward the hedge and the waiting mansion beyond, he made a decision. Tomorrow would be his last escape. Tomorrow he would tell Matilda the truth, that he had been sneaking out, that his father didn't know where he was, that the freedom she took for granted was for him a stolen treasure. Tomorrow he would have to choose between the safety of his golden cage and the messy, painful, wonderful reality of the world outside. Alexander returned to the mansion just as the evening shadows lengthened across the manicured lawns. The silence that greeted him was unexpected. No frantic staff members calling his name, no security alerts blaring through the house's discreet speaker system. Somehow, miraculously, his absence had gone unnoticed. Or so he thought. As he wheeled himself toward his bedroom, Greta stepped out of the shadows of the east hallway. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes held a storm of emotions. "You were at the playground again," she said. "Not a question." Alexander froze. "How did you... I've worked for your family since before you were born, Alex. Very little escapes my notice." She knelt beside his wheelchair, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I covered for you with Harrison. A mix-up with your physical therapy schedule. I can't keep doing this." Shame and gratitude battled within him. "I'm sorry, Greta. I just wanted to be normal. To have friends." Her eyes softened. "I understand more than you know. But your father has strict protocols in place for reasons you may not fully comprehend. Because I'm rich and someone might kidnap me," Alexander said, the familiar explanation suddenly feeling hollow. "Or because I might fall and hurt my leg again." Greta's expression turned grave. "Your father's fears run deeper than that, Alexander. After your mother's accident, ... single quotes." She stopped herself. It's not my place to say more. But sneaking out puts both you and your father at risk." "At risk of what? Being happy?" The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. Greta stood, smoothing her immaculate uniform. "Your father returns tomorrow evening. I suggest you use tomorrow wisely because I suspect it may be your last opportunity for ... extracurricular activities." She turned to leave, then paused. "And Alexander, be careful with that leg. It's showing signs of inflammation." After she left, Alexander sat in the gathering darkness of his room, her words echoing in his mind. Use tomorrow wisely. It was both permission and warning, a small act of rebellion from someone who had always represented the established order of the Hamilton household. That night, his video call with his father was mercifully brief. Nathaniel was distracted by developments at his board meeting, and Alexander was grateful. Each lie felt like another brick in a wall being built between them, a wall he never intended to create. Morning brought both anticipation and dread. His leg was indeed inflamed, the skin around his residual limb red and angry. Alexander winced as he applied the special cream Dr. Abernathy had prescribed for such occasion. He would definitely need the wheelchair today, and even that might be pushing the limits of what his body could handle. Was it worth it? The question haunted him as he mechanically went through his morning lessons. The joy of connection, of belonging, weighed against physical pain and his father's trust. There was no easy answer. By mid-afternoon, Alexander had made his decision. He would go one last time. He would tell Matilda the truth, explain why he couldn't keep coming, and perhaps, if he was very lucky, find a way to maintain this fragile new friendship within the confines of his father's rules. This time he left a note for Greta, hidden in their special spot, the hollow of the old oak bookcase, where they sometimes exchanged birthday surprises. Gone to say goodbye, back by 5. Thank you for understanding. The autumn air was crisp as Alexander made his way through the hedge. His wheelchair left tracks in the soft earth that would be visible to anyone looking. Another reminder that this freedom was temporary, conditional. The playground was abuzz with activity. Today was apparently relay race day as promised, with children divided into teams, passing pool noodles instead of batons. Alexander hesitated at the edge of the asphalt, suddenly unsure of his welcome. His wheelchair couldn't navigate the grassy track they'd created. But then Matilda spotted him, her face lighting up as she ran over. Alexander, you're just in time. We need a starter. Before he could respond, she was pushing his wheelchair to the starting line, positioning him at the head of the makeshift track. You can say on your mark, get set, go and wave the flag when each team should start, she explained, pressing a checkered dish towel into his hand. It's super important because everyone tries to cheat and go early. Just like that, he was part of the group again. His disability not an obstacle, but simply a factor in determining which role best suited him. The races began, Alexander's clear voice calling the starts. His decisions on false starts treated as final and indisputable. Halfway through the third race, Alexander noticed a familiar car parked across the street. A black Bentley with tinted windows, one of his father's fleet. His heart stuttered. Had his father returned early? Had security finally discovered his absence? But the car remained idle, no one emerging from it. Perhaps it was just a coincidence. There were other wealthy families in the area after all. Alexander forced himself to focus on the races, pushing the worry to the back of his mind. When the relay races ended, Matilda flopped onto the grass beside Alexander's wheelchair, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. That was awesome, she declared, even though Luke's team totally cheated on the last one. I saw that, Alexander agreed, smiling despite the anxiety gnawing at him. Listen, Matilda, there's something I need to tell you. She sat up, her expression suddenly serious. You sound like you're about to say something bad. Not bad exactly. Just ... single quotes. Alexander took a deep breath. I haven't been honest with you. My father doesn't know I'm here. I've been sneaking out without permission. Matilda's eyes widened. Seriously? Like, for real? Sneaking out? Not just Dad said no, but I came anyway, sneaking out. For real sneaking out. He thinks I'm having lessons at home. Nobody knows except Greta. She's our housekeeper and she's been covering for me. Instead of being shocked or disapproving, Matilda looked impressed. It's kind of awesome. And also kind of sad. She tilted her head. Why doesn't your dad let you play with us? Is he really that worried about your leg? It's complicated, Alexander said, echoing his father's favorite phrase. After my mom died and I got sick, he became very protective. He doesn't let me go anywhere without security guards and medical staff. He thinks the world is too dangerous. Well, that's dumb, Matilda said bluntly. The world is dangerous, sure, but so is being alone all the time. My mom says humans need connection or we shrivel up inside. The simplicity and wisdom of her statement struck Alexander deeply. That was exactly how he'd felt behind the gates. Like he was shriveling inside, withering away in his perfect, protected isolation. I can't keep sneaking out, he admitted. My father comes home tonight, and I think the staff is getting suspicious. Plus, my leg is really hurting from all this activity. Matilda looked genuinely distressed. But we just found you. You can't disappear again. I don't want to, Alexander said, the lump in his throat making his voice thick. But I don't know how to make this work. My father won't understand. Parents can surprise you sometimes, came a voice from behind them. Elena Carson stood there, grocery bags in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. Alexander felt a flash of panic. Would she report him? Call his father? Call the authorities? Elena set down her bags and knelt beside them. Alexander, sneaking out isn't safe, especially with your medical needs. But isolating you isn't the answer either. She spoke with the gentle frankness he was coming to associate with the Carson family. I think it's time we adults had a conversation about this. My father won't listen, Alexander insisted. He's made up his mind about what's best for me, perhaps, but he hasn't heard from me yet. Elena said with surprising determination. I can be quite persuasive when it comes to children's well-being. I'm a child psychologist, you see. That explained her perceptiveness, Alexander thought. He's not big on psychology, he warned. He says it's all theories and no data. Elena laughed. I've heard that before. But I have plenty of data on the developmental importance of peer relationships and normal social experiences. She glanced at her watch. Matilda, we need to head home. Alexander, would you like to join us for dinner? With proper permission this time. The invitation was tempting, achingly so, but the black Bentley still lurked across the street, a reminder of his father's invisible reach. I can't today, he said reluctantly, but thank you. Alina nodded, understanding in her eyes. Another time then. Matilda, say goodbye for now. Single quotes. Matilda looked mutinous but complied. This isn't goodbye forever, she insisted. We'll figure something out. Maybe your dad just needs to see how good you are at strategy games. Adults love it when kids are good at smart things. Despite everything, Alexander smiled. Maybe. I'll try to come back one way or another. As the Carsons walked away, Alexander cast one final glance at the playground. For 3 precious afternoons, he had experienced what it meant to be just Alexander, not the Hamilton heir, not the cancer survivor, not the boy with one leg, just Alexander. Referee and teammate and friend. The Bentley's engine started as he turned his wheelchair toward home. It pulled away smoothly, not following him but heading in the opposite direction. A warning? A coincidence? Alexander couldn't be sure. What he was sure of, as he carefully navigated back through the hedge toward the waiting mansion, was that he could never return to his old life of isolation. The gate that had once been his window to the world now felt like the bars of a prison. His father was coming home, and with him, a reckoning. Alexander had tasted freedom and friendship. He had felt the sun on his face without bulletproof glass between them. He had fallen and been helped up by hands that expected nothing in return. How could he explain any of this to Nathaniel Hamilton, a man who had spent the last 11 years building walls to keep the world away? As the mansion loomed before him, Alexander squared his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring consequences, but today had brought courage, and perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. The Hamilton estate was in perfect order when Nathaniel Hamilton's helicopter landed on the private helipad at precisely 7:15 p.m. Alexander watched from his bedroom window as his father emerged, briefcase in hand, his silver hair ruffled by the dying rotors. There was a military precision to his movements, each step deliberate and controlled. Alexander wondered not for the first time if his father had always been this way, or if grief and fear had reshaped him into this fortress of a man. Dinner had been arranged in the formal dining room, a sure sign that Greta expected tonight to be significant. Alexander wheeled himself down the hallway, the mahogany panels and priceless art that had once felt like home now seeming more like museum exhibits. Had 3 afternoons of normalcy changed him so profoundly, or had he always felt this disconnection from the opulence surrounding him? His father was already seated when Alexander entered, engrossed in his tablet. He looked up, his stern features softening slightly as they always did when he first saw Alexander after an absence. You're using the wheelchair, he noted, setting the tablet aside. Is your leg troubling you? Alexander nodded, deciding that at least this truth could be told plainly. It's been inflamed the past couple of days. Nothing serious. Nathaniel's eyebrows drew together in concern. Has Dr. Abernathy been notified? I've been applying the prescribed cream, Alexander deflected. It's already improving. Harrison appeared with the first course, a delicate asparagus soup that Alexander normally enjoyed but now found oddly flavorless. As they ate, his father recounted details from his board meeting, a carefully edited version of events that excluded anything that might worry or excite Alexander. It was their normal routine, safe topics, controlled information, a bubble of false tranquility. Alexander found himself studying his father's face, searching for signs of the man his mother had fallen in love with. In the few photographs Alexander had seen of them together, his father had been smiling, his eyes crinkled with laughter, his posture relaxed. That man seemed to have died with Alexander Hamilton on a rainy Tuesday 11 years ago. Is it something on your mind, son? Nathaniel asked, noticing Alexander's scrutiny. The question hung between them, an opportunity that Alexander had never before had the courage to grasp. But the memory of Matilda's blunt honesty gave him strength. Dad, he began, his voice steadier than he expected. Am I ever going to have a normal life? His father's fork paused midway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. Define normal. School. Friends. Activities outside these walls without a security detail watching my every move. Alexander took a breath. The chance to be just Alexander, not the Hamilton heir. Something flashed across his father's face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You've never expressed dissatisfaction with our arrangements before, because I didn't know what I was missing, Alexander admitted. I didn't know how it felt to be part of something, to belong somewhere because of who I am, not what I am. Nathaniel's expression hardened. And what has prompted this sudden desire for normalcy? This was it, the moment of truth. Alexander steeled himself. I've made a friend. Several friends, actually. Online? His father asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. In person, Alexander said, meeting his father's gaze direct. At Westbrook Elementary. I've been watching the children from the gate for months. 3 days ago, a girl named Matilda spoke to me. She invited me to play with them. And you declined, of course, Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously calm. No, Dad, I accepted. I've gone to the playground 3 times now. The words tumbled out. Unstoppable now that he'd begun. I played capture the flag. I refereed a soccer game. I called the starts for relay races. And nobody cared that I have one leg or that I live in a mansion. They just cared that I was fair and that I tried my best. Nathaniel Hamilton went very still, the kind of stillness that Alexander knew preceded his most carefully controlled anger. You left the property? Without security? Without informing anyone of your whereabouts? Greta knew, Alexander said, though he immediately regretted implicating her. Yesterday and today, at least. His father's eyes narrowed. I see. And your inflamed leg, this resulted from these unsupervised excursions, I presume. Alexander nodded, unable to deny it. I fell during the capture the flag game, but Dad, it was worth it. For the first time since Mom died, I felt normal. I felt like I belonged somewhere. Belonged? Nathaniel's voice rose slightly. You belong here, Alexander. This is your home, your heritage. These people, do they know who you are? What you represent? The target that the Hamilton name puts on your back? Matilda knows. And her mother, Elena Carson. She's a child psychologist, and she said, you revealed your identity to strangers? The facade of calm cracked. After everything we've been through. After the kidnapping attempts, after what happened to your mother. What did happen to Mom? Alexander demanded, his own voice rising to match his father's. You never tell me anything except that it was an accident. Why are you so afraid of the world? What are you not telling me? The question hit his father like a physical blow. Nathaniel pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. This discussion is over. You are confined to the house until further notice. No more trips to the gate, no more watching the children, and certainly no more unsanctioned excursions. He turned to leave, then paused. And I will be speaking with Greta about her role in endangering your safety. Dad, please, Alexander pleaded. Just meet Matilda and her mother. They're good people. They just want to help. Help? Help? His father's laugh was bitter. The world doesn't want to help the Hamilton family, Alexander. It wants to use us, exploit us, and when it can't get what it wants, it takes from us by force. I learned that lesson the hard way. I won't allow you to learn it too. He strode from the room, leaving Alexander alone with cooling soup and a hollowness in his chest that felt like grief. The brief, beautiful connection he'd found was being severed. Not because it was dangerous, but because his father couldn't see past his own fears. Alexander wheeled himself to the window, looking out at the darkened grounds. The moon cast silver light across the perfect lawn, the manicured hedges, the high stone wall that separated the Hamiltons from the world. Somewhere beyond that wall, Matilda was probably having dinner with her mother, talking about her day, planning tomorrow's playground adventures. Adventures he would no longer be part of. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Greta entered, her face grave. I've been relieved of my duties. Effective immediately, she said without preamble. I'm to pack my things tonight. Alexander felt sick. Greta, no. It's my fault. I'll talk to him. She shook her head. Your father's mind is made up, and perhaps he's right, I overstepped. She approached Alexander, kneeling beside his wheelchair as she had done countless times throughout his childhood, but I don't regret it. You needed those moments of freedom, those connections. They're part of growing up, part of healing. Where will you go? Alexander asked, fighting tears. I have a sister in Vermont, Greta said. It's time I visited her anyway. She took his hand. Alexander, listen to me. Your father loves you more than anything in this world. His fear comes from love, even if it's misguided. He won't tell me what happened to Mom, Alexander said. Not really. Greta's expression turned cautious. It's not my place to please, Greta. You're the only one who might tell me the truth. I need to understand why he's like this. She was silent for a long moment, clearly wrestling with her loyalty to Nathaniel and her love for Alexander. Finally, she sighed. Your mother's car accident wasn't random, Alexander. The police believed it was a deliberate attempt to kidnap her for ransom. When she resisted, single quotes, the unfinished sentence hung in the air, but Alexander understood. His mother hadn't simply died in an accident. She had been killed because of the Hamilton wealth, because someone had wanted to use her to get to that wealth. Your father changed after that, Greta continued softly. The investigation revealed security breaches, people close to the family who had shared information with the perpetrators. He couldn't trust anyone anymore. And then when you got sick, single quotes, she squeezed his hand. He almost lost everything that mattered. He couldn't bear the thought of losing you too. Alexander sat in stunned silence, pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. His father's paranoia, the extreme security measures, the isolation, all of it stemmed from a trauma far deeper than Alexander had imagined. But Greta, he said finally, he is losing me. Not to kidnappers or cancer, but to loneliness. To a life that feels more like survival than living. Greta's eyes filled with tears. I know, dear heart. I've known it for years. That's why I let you go through that hedge. That's why I covered for you. She stood, straightening her uniform all last time. Perhaps in time, your father will see it too. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, a gesture so maternal it made Alexander's throat tight. Be patient with him, Alexander. And when the time is right, be brave enough to keep fighting for your place in the world beyond these walls. After Greta left, Alexander remained by the window, watching the moon's slow journey across the night sky. His father's fears were founded in reality, in a tragedy Alexander had been too young to fully comprehend. But the cost of that fear, the isolation, the missed connections, the shriveling of his spirit that Matilda had so astutely named, was becoming too high to bear. Tomorrow there would be no escape through the hedge, no playground games, no Matilda. Tomorrow the walls would close in again, and Alexander would return to being the lonely billionaire's son with one leg, watching life from behind a gate, unless he found another way. Morning arrived with the clinical precision that governed life at the Hamilton estate. Alexander awoke to the sound of unfamiliar footsteps in the hallway. Greta's replacement, no doubt. A wave of sadness washed over him as he remembered their goodbye. Another person gone from his life, another connection severed. His leg felt better after a night's rest. Though the emotional pain far outweighed the physical, he attached his prosthetic and stood carefully, testing his weight. It would hold for now, though any strenuous activity was out of the question. When he emerged from his bedroom, a stranger was waiting. A woman in her 40s with a severe bun and a tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. "Good morning, young Mr. Hamilton," she said, her voice as starched as her uniform. "I'm Mrs. Winters. I'll be taking over Greta's responsibilities." She glanced at his prosthetic. Your father instructed me to remind you that Dr. Abernathy will be examining your leg at 10 o'clock sharp. Breakfast is served in the morning room." "No, how did you sleep?" No warm smile. No connection. Alexander nodded politely and made his way to breakfast, already missing Greta's gentle presence more than he had anticipated. His father was absent, having left at dawn for the office, according to Harris. The mansion felt eerily quiet without Greta's humming or his father's occasional phone calls echoing through the halls. Alexander pushed his eggs around his plate, appetite non-existent. When had this place become so lifeless? Or had it always been this way, and he had simply never noticed because he had nothing to compare it to? Dr. Abernathy's examination was thorough and disapproving. "Overexertion," he muttered, prodding the inflamed tissue around Alexander's residual limb. "Highly inadvisable given your medical history. We'll need to monitor this closely." Alexander endured the examination in silence, knowing any explanation would only result in further restriction. When the doctor finally left, he was prescribed 3 days of minimal prosthetic use and a new regimen of anti-inflammatory medication. The rest of the morning crawled by in a haze of tutoring sessions and physical therapy exercises, each minute stretching like taffy. Alexander's thoughts kept drifting to the playground, to Matilda and her friends. By now, they would be in their classrooms at Westbrook Elementary. Were they wondering where he was? Did they think he had abandoned them without saying goodbye? At precisely 1:15 p.m., Alexander's phone chimed with a notification, an unusual occurrence, as his device was heavily restricted. It was an email from an unknown address, subject line, "From your referee friend." His heart leaped. The message was brief. "Alexander, we missed you at the playground today. Mom says to tell you we understand if you can't come anymore, but we're not giving up," and she's making some calls. "P.S. Luke says you're still a know-it-all, but you're our know-it-all." Matilda, the simple message was like a lifeline thrown across the wall that separated him from the world. They hadn't forgotten him. They were still trying to reach him. Alexander quickly typed a reply, grounded indefinitely. "Greta is gone. Not allowed near the gate anymore. I'm sorry." He hesitated, then added, "Tell everyone I miss them. Even Luke." Before he could overthink it, he pressed send, then deleted both messages from his device. His father's security team routinely monitored his communications, and while they might miss one exchange, prolonged conversation would certainly be flagged. As the clock ticked closer to 3:45, the time he would normally have been watching from the gate or sneaking through the hedge, Alexander felt a physical pull toward the playground. But with Winters hovering nearby and his legs still tender, escape was impossible. Instead, he wheeled himself to the library, the furthest room from his usual observation spot. If he couldn't see the children playing, couldn't hear their laughter, perhaps the ache in his chest might ease. He selected a book at random, a biography of Amelia Earhart, a woman who had refused to be bound by society's expectations. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was deep into the 3rd chapter when a commotion at the front of the house caught his attention. Voices raised in argument, the deep baritone of Harrison responding to a woman's insistent tone. Alexander wheeled himself to the hallway, curiosity overriding his desire for distraction. In the grand foyer stood Elena Carson, her curly hair pulled back in a professional bun, her posture confident despite being surrounded by security personnel. She wore a tailored blazer over jeans, casual but authoritative. "Absolutely necessary that I speak with Mr. Hamilton," she was saying. "This concerns his son's psychological well-being." "Mr. Hamilton is unavailable," Harrison replied, his normally imperturbable demeanor showing cracks of annoyance, "and he does not receive unexpected visitors, regardless of their credentials." "Then I'll wait," Elena said, setting down her leather messenger bag and crossing her arms. Alexander's development is being negatively impacted by his isolation. As a licensed child psychologist with a specialty in trauma and attachment, I have a professional obligation to address this situation. Alexander couldn't believe what he was seeing. Matilda's mother had actually come to the mansion, had gotten past the security gate somehow, and was refusing to leave without speaking to his father. It was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing he had ever witnessed. "Mrs. Carson?" he called, wheeling himself into view. Elena turned, her expression softening when she saw him. "Alexander, I'm sorry to arrive unannounced like this, but after what Matilda told me about your father's reaction, single quotes." She approached him, ignoring Harrison's protests. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Alexander said automatically, then amended, "Well, not really fine, but physically okay." Elena nodded, understanding the distinction. "Matilda is very worried about you. All the children are. You've made quite an impression in just 3 days." Pride and sorrow mingled in Alexander's chest. "I'm not allowed to see them. My father thinks it's too dangerous." "So I gathered," Elena said dryly. That's why I'm here. To help him understand that the psychological risk of isolation far outweighs the hypothetical risk of normal social interaction. Harrison cleared his throat. Sis Carson, I must insist, it's Dr. Carson, actually, she corrected, not unkind. And I understand you're doing your job, Mr. Harrison, but I'm doing mine as well. She turned back to Alexander. Is there somewhere we could talk privately, just for a few minutes? Harrison's face reddened. Absolutely not. Mr. Hamilton would never permit. It's okay, Harrison, came a familiar voice from the doorway. Nathaniel Hamilton stood there, his expression unreadable. I'll take it from here. Alexander hadn't expected his father home before evening. Had he been called? Was he monitoring the security feeds remotely? Either way, the confrontation Alexander had hoped to postpone was now inevitable. Dad, he began, but his father silenced him with a raised hand. Dr. Carson, I presume? Nathaniel said, voice coldly polite. I understand you've taken an interest in my son's welfare. Elena straightened, meeting his gaze without flinching. I have. Professional interest as a child psychologist and personal interest as the mother of a child who has become Alexander's friend. Friend, Nathaniel repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. 3 unsupervised playground encounters hardly constitute friendship, Dr. Carson. Children form attachments more readily than adults, Elena replied. And genuine connections can develop quickly in the right circumstances. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. You're trespassing on private property. I tried calling first, Elena countered. My messages were blocked. My emails went unanswered. And this situation is too important to ignore. She took a step closer to him. Your son is 11 years old, Mr. Hamilton. These are crucial years for social development, for forming his identity separate from his family unit. By isolating him, even with the best intentions, you're denying him essential developmental experiences. I'm protecting him, Nathaniel said, a dangerous edge to his voice. From what? Elena asked, gentle but persistent. From friendship? From joy? From the messy, beautiful, occasionally painful process of growing up? Alexander watched the exchange in fascination. Elena spoke to his father not as the intimidating billionaire others saw, but as simply another parent trying to do his best. There was no fear in her approach, no deference, just professional confidence and genuine concern. Dr. Carson, Nathaniel said, his tone measured. You don't know our family's history. The threats we've faced, I know about Alexander's murder, Elena said quietly. I read the public case files before coming here today. The words hung in the air like smoke. Murder. Not accident. The truth that had always been carefully obscured in Alexander's presence, suddenly spoken aloud. Alexander stared at his father, waiting for denial, for anger at this breach of family privacy. Instead, Nathaniel Hamilton seemed to deflate slightly, as if a burden long carried had suddenly shifted. Perhaps, he said after a long moment, we should continue this discussion in my study. He glanced at Alexander. Alone. No, Alexander said, surprising himself with his firmness. If you're going to talk about me, about my life, I want to be there. I need to be there. His father looked at him, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. In that moment, Alexander wasn't the fragile child who had battled cancer, wasn't the vulnerable boy who had lost his mother. He was a young man claiming his right to participate in decisions that would shape his future. After what seemed like an eternity, Nathaniel nodded. Very well. Harrison, please bring refreshments to my study. He turned and walked down the hallway, expecting them to follow. As Alexander wheeled himself after his father, Elena fell into step beside him. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. I can advocate for you without putting you in an uncomfortable position. Alexander shook his head. I'm sure. It's time I started fighting for myself. The study door loomed ahead, the threshold to a conversation that might change everything. Nathaniel Hamilton's study was a testament to calculated power. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes that Alexander suspected had never been opened. A massive desk of polished mahogany dominated the center of the room, positioned so that visitors would feel the psychological disadvantage of approaching across open space. The wall behind the desk displayed Nathaniel's numerous achievements, diplomas, awards, magazine covers featuring his stern profile. Alexander positioned his wheelchair across from his father, who had taken his customary place behind the desk. Elena chose to stand rather than sit in the visitor's chair, subtly rejecting the power dynamic Nathaniel had established. M.R. Hamilton, Elena began, I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I understand your concerns for Alexander's safety are rooted in a traumatic experience. Nathaniel's expression remained impassive. You've done your research, I have, and I respect your desire to protect your son. Elena's voice was professional yet warm, but protection has many dimensions beyond physical security. Emotional and social development require a different kind of safety, the safety to explore, connect, and occasionally fail. Alexander watched his father's face, looking for any sign that Elena's words were penetrating the armor he had built around himself over the years. Dr. Carson, Nathaniel replied, folding his hands on the desk. While I appreciate your professional opinion, you don't have all the facts. The threats against our family didn't end with my wife's death. There have been other attempts, carefully concealed from Alexander and the public, but very real. This was news to Alexander. He leaned forward in his wheelchair. What attempts? His father shot him a warning look, clearly regretting the admission. That's not relevant to this discussion. With respect, Mr. Hamilton, it's entirely relevant, Elena countered. If Alexander doesn't understand the specific reasons for his isolation, how can he participate in his own safety? Children who comprehend real dangers are more likely to adhere to necessary precautions without rebelling against rules that seem arbitrary. I'm not a child anymore, Alexander interjected. I'm 11. In 7 years, I'll be an adult. How am I supposed to function in the world if I've never been allowed to experience? Father's jaw tightened. There are appropriate, supervised ways to introduce you to the world. Sneaking out to play with strangers isn't one of them. They're not strangers anymore, Alexander insisted. They're friends, and I wasn't in danger. The playground is visible from our property. It's 300 yards from our security cameras. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. How would you know about the range of our security cameras? Alexander faltered, realizing his mistake. I overheard the security team discussing it once. He's observant, Elena noted with approval. That awareness is an asset to his safety, not a liability. Nathaniel stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the grounds. For a long moment, he stared out at the wall that separated the Hamilton estate from the world beyond. When Alexander was killed, he said finally, his voice so quiet Alexander had to strain to hear. It wasn't a random attack. It was orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of our family's routines, someone we trusted. He turned back to face them. Do you know what that does to a person, Dr. Carson? To discover that someone you welcomed into your home used that access to destroy your family? Elena's expression was compassionate but unwavering. It creates a profound trauma response, hypervigilance, distrust, an overwhelming need to control every variable to prevent another loss. She paused. I work with trauma victims every day, Emma Hamilton. I understand the psychological impact of betrayal and loss. Then you should understand why I can't simply allow Alexander to roam freely beyond these walls, making connections with people who could exploit him. Dad, Alexander said, finding courage in Elena's steady presence. You can't keep me in a bubble forever. Mom wouldn't have wanted that. His father flinched as if struck. Don't presume to know what your mother would have wanted. I may not remember her clearly. Alexander pressed on, but I remember how she made me feel. Safe, but free. She used to tell me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite being afraid. He wheeled himself closer to his father. Mom was brave. She wouldn't have let fear dictate her choices. Nathaniel's composure cracked, just for a moment, revealing the raw grief that still lived beneath his controlled exterior. Alexandra's bravery got her killed. The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Elena stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Mr. Hamilton, I hear your fear. It's valid and understandable, but consider this. By isolating Alexander so completely, you may be increasing his vulnerability, not decreasing. Explain, Nathaniel demanded. Children who develop in isolation lack the social skills and instincts to recognize dangerous situations or manipulative people, Elena explained. They haven't had the opportunity to build those protective mechanisms through regular peer interactions. When they eventually enter the world, and Alexander will one day, they're more susceptible to those who might wish to take advantage of them. Alexander had never considered this perspective. His father's protection, intended to keep him safe, might actually be making him more vulnerable in the long term. The irony was painful. Furthermore, Elena continued, there's substantial research indicating that social isolation in childhood and adolescence correlates with negative health outcomes, including compromised immune function. For someone with Alexander's medical history, that's a significant consideration. Nathaniel returned to his desk, his movements deliberate. You make compelling arguments, Dr. Carson, but they don't address the specific security concerns unique to our situation. Then let's address them, Elena suggests. Instead of an all-or-nothing approach, what about incremental steps? Supervise social interactions in secure environments, gradually expanding Alexander's world while maintaining appropriate safeguards. For the first time since the conversation began, Nathaniel appeared thoughtful rather than defensive. What exactly are you proposing? Alexander held his breath, hardly daring to hope. Start with something structured and limited, Elena said. For instance, Alexander mentioned he excels at strategy games. Westbrook Elementary has a chess club that meets after school 3 days a week. It's supervised by teachers, takes place in a contained environment, and would give Alexander a chance to interact with peers in a setting that plays to his strengths. The suggestion was so practical, so reasonable, that Alexander could almost see his father's objections disintegrating before they could form. A chess club, Nathaniel repeated, considering. Your security team could sweep the location beforehand, Elena added. Alexander would be in a public school with security cameras and established entry protocols. You could even have a plainclothes security officer present if that would provide additional peace of mind, and I'd be doing something educational. Alexander chimed in, seizing the opportunity. Something that would challenge my strategic thinking. Nathaniel drummed his fingers on the desk, his expression inscrutable. And this would be sufficient? You wouldn't continue attempting unsanctioned outing? The question was directed at Alexander, who recognized it as both a test and an olive brand. If I could attend chess club regularly, and maybe if it goes well, Add other supervised activities over time. I would follow whatever security protocols you established. I just want a chance to be more than a patient or an heir. I want to be a normal kid sometimes. Alexander will never be a completely normal child, Elena observed gently. His circumstances are too unique, but he deserves the opportunity to discover who he is beyond the labels of Hamilton heir or cancer survivor. Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Alexander recognized the expression on his father's face. He was running calculations, assessing variables, weighing risks against benefits as he did with every business decision. 3 conditions, Nathaniel finally said. First, security protocols will be non-negotiable and comprehensive. Second, your leg health takes priority. Any sign of inflammation or complication and activities will be suspended until Dr. Abernathy clears you. Third, academic excellence must be maintained. Alexander could hardly believe what he was hearing. Was his father actually considering Elena's proposal? I can agree to those conditions, he said quickly before his father could reconsider. I haven't agreed to anything yet, Nathaniel cautioned. I need time to review the security implications, speak with Dr. Abernathy, and conduct thorough background checks on the school staff. That's entirely reasonable, Elena. Would you like me to provide information about the chess club schedule and supervision? Nathaniel nodded. Send it to my assistant. And Dr. Carson ... Single quotes, he hesitated, then continued with visible effort. Thank you for your direct approach. Most people are too intimidated to speak to me so frankly about my son's welfare. Most people don't have a daughter who comes home talking about her new friend who watches the world from behind a gate. Elena replied with a small smile. Matilda can be quite persuasive when she's concerned about someone. She gets that from her mother. Apparently, Nathaniel observed dryly, the closest he had come to humor in Alexander's recent memory. As Elena prepared to leave, she turned to Alexander. I'll let Matilda know we've had a productive conversation. She's been quite worried about you. Tell her I'm okay, Alexander said, and thank her for me. After Elena departed, silence descended on the study. Alexander waited, uncertain whether to speak or to give his father space to process the conversation. You've really connected with these children in just 3 days? Nathaniel finally asked, genuine curious voice. Alexander nodded. It was easier than I expected. They didn't care about our money or my leg. They just cared that I was fair and that I tried. Single quotes, his father's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Your mother would have liked that. She always valued fairness above all else. It was the most personal thing his father had said about Alexander Hamilton in years. Alexander felt a tentative hope blooming in his chest. Not just for chess club or supervised playdates, but for a new kind of relationship with his father, one built on honesty rather than fear. Dad, he said carefully, I'm not trying to replace what we have. I just want to add to it. To find out who Alexander is when he's not just Hamilton. Nathaniel regarded his son with newfound awareness. I sometimes forget how much you've grown, he admitted quietly. Perhaps it's time I started seeing you as you are, not as the child I'm afraid to lose. It wasn't a promise of freedom, not yet, but it was a beginning. 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo of anticipation and doubt. True to his word, Nathaniel Hamilton had launched a comprehensive security assessment of Westbrook Elementary School. The principal's office had been bewildered by the team of stern-faced men and women who appeared with credentials from Hamilton Industries, requesting floor plans, staff backgrounds, and emergency protocols. Alexander, meanwhile, existed in a state of cautious hope. His father hadn't explicitly promised anything, but he hadn't explicitly refused either. It was more consideration than Alexander had dared to expect. His leg had healed completely, the inflammation subsiding with rest and medication. Dr. Abernathy had cleared him for normal activity, though with stern warnings about monitoring his condition. Alexander took these warnings seriously. He couldn't afford any medical setbacks that might jeopardize his tentative progress toward freedom. Mrs. Winters remained a cool, efficient presence in the household, never quite filling the warmth Greta had left behind, but Alexander had noticed small changes in the estate's atmosphere. His father was spending more evenings at home, occasionally joining him for dinner rather than working late at the office. Their conversations, while still careful, had begun to include topics beyond Alexander's studies and health. Small steps, perhaps, but significant ones. Alexander was in the library working on a history essay when Harrison appeared at the door, his usual stoic expression betraying a hint of surprise. Young Mr. Hamilton, your father requests your presence in his office immediately. Alexander's heart leaped to his throat. Had a decision been made? He followed Harrison through the house, trying not to read too much into the summons. Nathaniel Hamilton stood at the window of his home office, hands clasped behind his back, his posture as rigid as ever. But when he turned to face Alexander, there was something different in his expression, a resolution that hadn't been there before. Alexander, he began formally. I've completed my assessment of the chess club proposal. Alexander held his breath, bracing himself for disappointment despite his best efforts to remain positive. The security protocols have been established and vetted by our team, Nathaniel continued. Background checks on the faculty supervisor and all regular participants have been completed. A secure transportation route has been mapped. He paused, studying Alexander's face. If you still wish to participate. The first session you may attend is tomorrow afternoon. The words took a moment to register. Tomorrow. He could go tomorrow. Alexander opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. After years of isolation, after countless requests denied and hopes crushed, after resigning himself to watching life from behind a gate, this simple permission felt monumental. Yes, he finally managed. Yes, I still wish to participate. His father nodded, reaching for a folder on his desk. These are the security protocols. I expect you to familiarize yourself with them tonight and follow them without exception. Alexander accepted the folder, flipping it open to find detailed instructions, emergency procedures, and contact protocols. It was extensive, perhaps excessive, but he didn't care. It was a price he was willing to pay. Thank you, he said, the words inadequate for the emotions swirling within him. Nathaniel's expression softened marginally. Doctor, Carson made several compelling points about your development, and that's hesitated. Your observations about what your mother would have wanted were not without merit. It was as close to an admission of error as Nathaniel Hamilton had ever come. Alexander felt a lump form in his throat. There's something else, his father added. I've rehired Greta. Alexander's head snapped up in surprise. Really? She returned next week. Mrs. Winters will be reassigned. Nathaniel cleared his throat. I may have been hasty in my judgment. Alexander couldn't suppress his grin. That's wonderful news. His father almost smiled, almost. Yes, well, don't get too excited. The security protocols still stand, and your academic schedule remains non-negotiable. But Alexander was already too elated to be dampened by these caveats. Chess club tomorrow. Greta returning next week. The world was cracking open, just a sliver, but enough to let in light. The morning of his first chess club meeting dawned bright and clear. Alexander could barely focus on his lessons, his mind constantly drifting to the afternoon ahead. What would the other club members be like? Would Matilda be there? Would they accept him, or would his wealth and his leg make him an outsider? By the time 3 o'clock arrived, Alexander was a bundle of nerves and excitement. He had opted for his prosthetic rather than crutches or the wheelchair, wanting to appear as normal as possible for this first encounter. Harrison drove him to Westbrook Elementary in the smallest, least ostentatious car in the Hamilton fleet, still a luxury vehicle, but not the usual chauffeured town car that would have announced his family's wealth to everyone within sight. A plainclothes security officer sat in the passenger seat, his trained eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The school building was modest but well-maintained, nothing like the private academies Alexander had briefly attended before his illness. Children streamed out of the main entrance, laughing and shouting as they headed for buses and waiting parents. A few glanced curiously at Alexander as Harrison helped him from the car, but most were too absorbed in their own affairs to pay him much attention. The normality of it was breathtaking. Alexander had spent so many years observing life from a distance that being part of the everyday tableau felt surreal, as if he had stepped through the looking glass into a world that had always existed parallel to his own. Harrison accompanied him to the designated classroom, the security officer following at a discreet distance. Alexander had memorized the school layout from his father's security briefing, but the reality of the building, the echoing hallways, the art projects displayed on walls, the scuffed floors bearing witness to hundreds of small feet, was far more vibrant than any floor plan. Room 112 had a hand-lettered sign on the door, Chess Club. All welcome. Alexander paused at the threshold, suddenly uncertain. What if this was a mistake? What if he couldn't relate to these children who had grown up in a world so different from his own? Would you like me to accompany you inside? Harrison asked, noting his hesitation. Alexander shook his head. No, thank you. I can manage from here. His father's protocol allowed for the security team to remain outside the room, observing from the hallway, and Alexander was determined to claim this small independence. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. Inside, about a dozen children sat at tables arranged in pairs, chessboards set up between them. A middle-aged man with a kind face and wire-rimmed glasses stood at the front, demonstrating a move on a large magnetic board. The conversation paused as Alexander entered, all eyes turning toward him. He felt his cheeks warm under the scrutiny, his hand instinctively tightening on his prosthetic leg. Then a familiar voice broke the silence. Alexander, you came. Matilda bounded from her seat at the back of the room, her curly hair held back by a colorful headband. Her smile was wide and genuine, a beacon of welcome in the sea of curious faces. Everyone, this is Alexander, she announced to the room at large. He's the strategic genius I was telling you about. Alexander felt his blush deepen. I'm not a genius, he protested quietly. We'll see about that, said the teacher, approaching with an extended hand. I'm Peterson. Welcome to Chess Club. Matilda has been singing your praises for weeks. Alexander shook his hand, relieved by the warm reception. Thank you for having me. We're always excited to have new members, Mr. Peterson said. Do you know how to play, or would you like an introduction to the basics? I know how to play, Alexander replied. His father had taught him chess when he was 6, and it had become one of their few shared activities over. Excellent. Why don't you join Matilda, who's been waiting for a worthy opponent? Matilda grinned, grabbing Alexander's arm and pulling him toward the back table. I've been practicing, she whispered conspiratorially. Luke bet me I couldn't beat you, and I hate losing bets to Luke. The casual physical contact, the easy inclusion, the assumption that he belonged, it all washed over Alexander in a wave of unfamiliar emotion. This was what normal felt like. This was what friendship felt like. As he sat across from Matilda, the chessboard between them, Alexander caught sight of Harrison and the security officer watching from the hallway. Two worlds colliding yet coexisting. The protected air and the ordinary chess club member. Could he really be both? White or black? Matilda asked, drawing his attention back to the game. You choose, Alexander replied, settling into the familiar rhythm of chess preparation. White, she decided. I need every advantage I can get if you're as good as your reputation suggests. As Matilda made her opening move, Alexander felt something shift inside him, a quiet certainty that this moment, this simple act of playing chess in a classroom after school, was the beginning of something profound, not just for him, but perhaps for his father too, a gradual thawing of the frozen fear that had imprisoned them both for so long. The chess game unfolded, move by careful move, a metaphor for the delicate new reality Alexander was creating, one protected step at a time. 3 months of carefully supervised chess club meetings had transformed Alexander's life in ways both subtle and profound. His calendar, once filled only with tutoring sessions and medical appointments, now contained a highlight that he anticipated with genuine excitement. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at Westbrook Elementary, room 112. Today marked a significant milestone, the winter chess tournament, where Alexander would represent Westbrook against teams from neighboring schools. He had earned his spot through a series of qualifying matches, much to Matilda's mock chagrin when he defeated her in the semifinals. You better win the whole thing, she'd told him with a playful punch to his shoulder, or I'll never forgive you for knocking me out. As Harrison drove him to the school, Alexander reviewed the tournament brackets in his mind. His first opponent would be from Oak Ridge Preparatory, ironically one of the exclusive private schools his father had once considered for him. The symmetry wasn't lost on Alexander. Nervous? Harrison asked, catching Alexander's pensive expression in the rearview mirror. A little, Alexander admitted. It's my first real competition, Harrison nodded. Your father wanted me to tell you he'll try to make it for the final round if his meeting concludes early enough. Alexander's heart gave a hopeful leap. His father had never attended a chess club meeting, maintaining his distance while gradually extending Alexander's freedoms. The possibility of his presence today, even if uncertain, felt significant. At the school, the gymnasium had been transformed into a tournament venue. Long tables lined with chessboards stretched across the floor, surrounded by chairs for spectators. Parents chatted in small groups while contestants from various schools huddled with their teams. The atmosphere buzzed with competitive energy and parental pride. Mr. Peterson greeted Alexander with a firm handshake. Ready to show them what Westbrook is made of? Alexander nodded, scanning the room for familiar faces. He spotted Matilda waving enthusiastically from the bleachers, flanked by her mother and, surprisingly, Luke, whose grudging respect had evolved into something approximating friendship over the past months. Your fan club is here in force, Mr. Peterson observed with a smile. Round 1 starts in 15 minutes. Why don't you join your teammates for the pep talk? The Westbrook team, 6 players including Alexander, gathered in a corner of the gym. They were a diverse group. Jaden, the quick-thinking 5th grader with a penchant for aggressive opening. Sophia, the methodical 6th grader who rarely made mistakes. Twins Marcus and Maria, who specialized in different aspects of the game. And Wei, a quiet 3rd grader whose strategic mind belied his age. And then there was Alexander, the newcomer who had quickly established himself as one of the team's strongest players. His years of solitary chess study, guided by his father and occasionally by visiting grandmasters hired for private lessons, had given him a foundation that most school players couldn't match. But here that advantage wasn't resented, it was celebrated as an asset for the team. Remember, it's not just about winning, Mr. Peterson reminded them. It's about representing Westbrook with dignity and sportsmanship. Win or lose, I want to see handshakes and respect. Alexander took his position at table 4, where his first opponent waited. A boy about his age wearing the navy blazer and gray slacks of Oak Ridge Preparatory. The boy's eyes flicked briefly to Alexander's prosthetic leg, then back to his face. I'm Thomas, he said, extending his hand. Alexander, he replied, shaking Thomas's hand firmly. As they set up the board, Thomas spoke again. Hamilton, right? My father works for Cybershield Industries. He says your dad is a genius. Alexander tensed slightly. Here it was, the recognition, the connection to his family's wealth and power. Would it change things? Would Thomas treat him differently now? But Thomas just continued setting up his pieces. Must be cool to have a genius dad. Mine just tells terrible dad jokes and embarrasses me in public. The simple normalcy of the comment caught Alexander off guard. He laughed, relaxing. My dad doesn't tell jokes, but he did hire a chess grandmaster to teach me when I was 7, so that was pretty. Thomas groaned good-naturedly. Great. I'm definitely going to lose. Not necessarily, Alexander said, surprising himself with his honesty. I get nervous in competitions. This is my first real tournament. Thomas looked genuinely shocked. Seriously? This is my 5th this year. Before they could continue, the tournament director called for attention. After a brief welcome speech, the matches began, the room falling into the concentrated silence of competitive chess, broken only by the soft click of pieces and the occasional scratch of pencils recording. Alexander found himself settling into the familiar rhythm of the game, the outside world fading as he focused on the board before him. Thomas was a solid player, but Alexander had developed a deep understanding of positional play during his years of isolation. 40 minutes into their match, Alexander executed a knight sacrifice that led to a decisive advantage. 3 moves later, checkmate in 4, Thomas conceded, offering his hand. Nice sacrifice. I didn't see it coming, Alexander shook his hand, feeling a rush of satisfaction that had nothing to do with his opponent's recognition of his name or family. This victory was entirely his own, earned through skill rather than inheritance. The tournament progressed through the morning. Alexander won his second match against a girl from Lincoln Middle School who played a surprisingly aggressive game. His third match against Westridge Elementary's top player ended in a hard-fought draw that advanced Alexander to the semifinals based on points from previous rounds. During the lunch break, Alexander joined Matilda, Elena, and Luke at a table in the school cafeteria. The normalcy of the scene, eating sandwiches in a noisy cafeteria, surrounded by other children, still felt miraculous after years of solitary meals in the Hamilton Estate's formal dining room. That night's sacrifice in your first match was brilliant, Matilda declared, unwrapping her sandwich. Even Luke was impressed, and he's never impressed by anything. It was okay, Luke admitted grudgingly. For a rich kid, Alexander had come to recognize Luke's barbs as his peculiar form of friendship. Thanks for the ringing endorsement. How are you feeling about the semifinals? Elena asked, her psychologist's eye no doubt noting the subtle signs of tension in Alexander's posture. Nervous, he admitted. Li Peng from Farmington has won this tournament twice before. He glanced at his watch. And my dad might come for the final round if I make it that far. Elena nodded, understanding. That adds some pressure. But remember, your father will be proud regardless of the outcome. Would he? Alexander wasn't so sure. Nathaniel Hamilton didn't have much experience with anything less than excellence. But over the past months, small changes had appeared in their relationship. Moments of connection that gave Alexander hope that his father was learning, just as he was, how to navigate this new normal. The semifinals proved as challenging as Alexander had anticipated. Li Peng was a methodical, experienced player who gave nothing away without exacting a price. Their game stretched longer than any of Alexander's previous matches. A tense positional battle where territory was gained and lost by inches. As the match entered its second hour, Alexander became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere around their table. Looking up briefly, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the back of the gymnasium, his father, flanked discreetly by his security detail. Watching the match with intense focus, Alexander felt a momentary surge of anxiety. What if he lost with his father watching? Would this experiment in normalcy be deemed a failure? Would the gates close again? Taking a deep breath, he refocused on the board. The position was complex, balanced on a knife's edge. Lee had just moved his bishop to threaten Alexander's queen while simultaneously opening a diagonal for his rook. It was a clever trap, designed to force a disadvantageous exchange. Alexander studied the position, mentally projecting 5, 6, 7 moves ahead. There was a counter, but it was risky, a pawn advance that would appear to weaken his king's position while setting up a discovered attack 3 moves later. It wasn't the safe play. The safe play would be to retreat, to minimize losses, to play for a draw. His father would choose the safe play. The billionaire's calculation: minimize risk, secure position. Accept the smaller victory when the larger one carried too much uncertainty. But Alexander wasn't just the billionaire's son anymore. He was also the boy who had escaped through a hedge to play capture the flag, the referee who had called fair plays regardless of who had the advantage, the friend who had promised Matilda he would win the tournament after defeating her. He advanced the pawn. Lee's eyebrows rose slightly, the first real expression he had shown during their match. He studied the board intently, clearly trying to unravel Alexander's strategy. For the next 3 moves, Alexander felt as if he were balancing on his prosthetic leg during capture the flag again. Precarious, vulnerable, but exhilaratingly alive. When his discovered attack finally sprung, forcing Lee's king into a compromised position, Alexander caught a flicker of recognition in his opponent's eyes. 4 moves later, Lee tipped his king in resignation. Well played, Lee said quietly. The pawn advance was unexpected. It was risky, Alexander acknowledged. Lee shrugged philosophically. Chess rewards calculated risks. Good luck in the finals. As Alexander rose from the table, his legs stiff from sitting so long, he found himself face to face with his father. Nathaniel Hamilton's expression was unreadable, his posture as rigid as ever. But there was something in his eyes that Alexander hadn't seen before, a gleam that might have been pride, or perhaps something more complex. That was an unconventional strategy, his father said. Alexander nodded, waiting for the critique that would surely follow. Instead, Nathaniel Hamilton did something that shocked Alexander more than any chess victory. He smiled, a small, unpracticed thing, but genuine. It reminded me of your mother. She never took the expected path either. Before Alexander could respond to this unprecedented comparison, his father glanced at his watch. I need to return to the office briefly, but I'll be back for the final match. He paused, then added, regardless of the outcome, your performance today has been ... impressive. As his father walked away, Alexander stood frozen in place, the compliment warming him more deeply than any trophy could. Matilda appeared at his side, practically bouncing with excitement. You're in the finals. And was that your dad? Did he see your match? What did he say? Alexander turned to her, a slow smile spreading across his face. He said I remind him of my mother. Matilda tilted her head, clearly not understanding the significance. Is that good? It's the best thing he could have said, Alexander replied. Now who am I playing in the finals? Zoe Chun from Edgewater, Matilda reported. She's really good. Undefeated so far. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. But you're going to win. I can feel it. Alexander looked around the gymnasium at the children competing and cheering, at Elena Carson giving him a thumbs up from the bleachers. at Luke pretending not to care about the outcome, at the space his father had occupied and would return to. Win or lose the final match, Alexander Hamilton had already claimed the most important victory of all. Spring had transformed the Hamilton estate. The gardens burst with color, the trees that had stood like skeletal sentinels all winter now lush with fresh green leaves. Alexander sat on a blanket spread across the lawn, surrounded by textbooks, chess pieces, and most remarkably friends. Today marked 6 months since his first chess club meeting, and his father had agreed to host a small gathering to celebrate the team's successful season. It was an unprecedented concession from Nathaniel Hamilton, allowing children who weren't heirs to fortunes or the offspring of business associates onto the sacred grounds of the estate. "Your yard is bigger than my entire neighborhood," Luke commented, flopping onto his back and staring up at the expanse of sky above them. "Luke!" Matilda hissed, elbowing him. "Don't be rude." "What? It's true," Luke protested. "I'm not saying it's bad, just excessive." Alexander laughed. 6 months ago, such an observation would have made him uncomfortable, a painful reminder of the gulf between his world and theirs. Now he could appreciate the absurdity of it. "It is excessive," he agreed. "I used to get lost when I was little across the lawn." Nathaniel Hamilton stood with Elena Carson and Mr. Peterson engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. His father still maintained his formal posture, still wore perfectly tailored suits even on weekends, but something fundamental had shifted. The fortress walls hadn't come down entirely, but windows and doors had appeared carefully secured, certainly, but allowing passage nonetheless. The winter chess tournament had been the turning point. Alexander's victory in the final match against Zoe Chun had been hard-fought and narrow, coming down to the last few pieces on the board. When he had finally maneuvered his rook into a winning position, securing checkmate in 2 moves, Alexander had looked up to find his father watching with an expression he had never seen before, a blend of pride, wonder, and something that might have been regret. "You played brilliantly," his father had said afterward as they drove home in uncharacteristic silence. "Thank you," Alexander had replied, clutching his trophy. "I'm glad you were there to see it." His father had been quiet for a long moment, then said, "I've been absent for too many moments, Alexander. I'm beginning to understand that my attempts to protect you have limited you in ways I hadn't considered." It wasn't an apology, no. Nathaniel Hamilton rarely apologized explicitly, but it was an acknowledgement, and from that acknowledgement had grown small, careful changes. A supervised playdate at the Carson home, a class field trip with discreet security, the chess team practices hosted in the Hamilton estate's sunroom. Each successful venture beyond the gates had built confidence Alexander's in his ability to navigate the world, and his father's in the possibility that protection didn't have to mean isolation. "Earth to Alexander," Matilda called, waving her hand in front of his face. "It's your move. Are you letting me win on purpose?" Alexander blinked, returning his attention to the chess game between them. The others had spread out across the lawnway and the twins playing with a frisbee. Harrison had unearthed from a storage closet, Sophia and Jaden deep in conversation about summer reading lists. "Sorry, just thinking," Alexander said, studying the board. Matilda had improved tremendously over the past months, her natural strategic mind honed by practice and competition. He moved his bishop, setting up a complex exchange that would test how far she had come. Matilda frowned at the board, her curls falling forward as she leaned in to analyze his move. "You're trying to trap my queen," she declared, seeing through his strategy immediately. "Maybe," he teased, "or maybe that's what I want you to think." As they continued their game, Alexander noticed his father breaking away from the adults and walking toward them. 6 months ago, this approach would have filled him with anxiety. What rule had been broken? What protocol violated? Now he felt only a mild curiosity. "Alexander," his father said, reaching their blank, "Dr. Carson has made an interesting proposal I'd like to discuss with you." Matilda scrambled to her feet, suddenly formal in the way children became around intimidating adults. "Should I give you privacy, MR?" "Hamilton?" To Alexander's surprise, his father shook his head. "No need, Matilda. This concerns you as well." He lowered himself onto the edge of the blanket, the casual posture so at odds with his formal attire that Alexander had to suppress a smile. "Westbrook Elementary is organizing a summer program," Nathaniel continued. "Carson has volunteered as a counselor, and Mr. Peterson will be teaching the robotics component." Alexander's heart began to race with anticipation. A summer camp? It seemed impossibly normal, impossibly free. "The security challenges are significant," his father acknowledged, his expression serious, but not insurmountable. "If you're interested, we can make arrangements." "If I'm interested?" Alexander repeated, unable to contain his excitement. "Dad, yes, I'm definitely interested." Matilda bounced on her toes. "I knew it. Mom wouldn't tell me why she was asking so many questions about the camp security, but I figured it had to be about you." Nathaniel nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "There would be conditions, of course. Daily check-ins, a secure communication protocol, and Dr. Abernath prove your participation in all physical activity," whatever Alexander promised. "Thank you, Dad." His father's expression softened, vulnerability briefly visible beneath his controlled exterior. "Your mother loved summers at the lake," he said quietly. "She would want this for you. It was the most personal thing his father had shared about Alexandra Hamilton in years, not a lesson or a value, but a simple human preference, a piece of the woman who had been more than a tragedy or a cautionary tale. As his father rose to rejoin the adults, Matilda plopped back down on the blanket, her eyes wide. 2 weeks at Lake Merritt? That's huge, Alexander. We're gonna have the best time if I can pass my father's security protocols, Alexander reminded her, though his smile belied any real concern. The past months had proven that compromise was possible, that safety and freedom weren't always opposing forces. Please, Matilda scoffed. Your dad may look intimidating in his fancy suits, but my mom hasn't lost an argument since 2018. If she says you're coming to camp, you're coming to camp. Alexander laughed, the sound carrying across the lawn. Luke looked over, raising an eyebrow at their evident mirth, then shook his head with exaggerated disdain before returning to his conversation with Sophia. What about your leg? Matilda asked, lowering her voice. Will it be okay for swimming and hiking and stuff? The question held no pity, only practical concern. It was one of the things Alexander valued most about his new friends. They acknowledged his difference without defining him by it. Dr. Abernathy has been helping me prepare for more active situations, he explained. I have a special prosthetic for swimming and one designed for uneven terrain. Between those and my crutches, I should be able to manage most activities. And when you can't, Matilda said with conviction, we'll figure it out together. That's what teams do, together. The word resonated deeply. 6 months ago, Alexander's world had been defined by separation, the wall around the estate, the gates that kept others out, the invisible barriers between him and normal experiences. Now, together had become not just possible, but natural. As the afternoon stretched on, Alexander found himself observing the scene with a sense of wonder. Children playing on his lawn. His father engaged in casual conversation with regular people. Security personnel present but discreet, part of the background rather than the defining feature of his existence. When it came time for his friends to leave, Alexander stood at the front entrance of the mansion, accepting hugs and fist bumps with the ease of practice. 6 months ago, physical contact had been largely limited to medical examinations and formal handshakes. Now, Matilda's quick embrace and Luke's reluctant shoulder bump felt like the most natural exchanges in the world. See you Tuesday at chess club, Mr. Peterson said, shaking Alexander's hand. And this summer at Lake Merritt, Matilda added with a grin. As the cars pulled away down the long driveway, Alexander remained on the steps, watching until they disappeared from view. His father came to stand beside him, an unusual quietness between them. They're good kids, Nathaniel finally said. They are, Alexander agreed. Thank you for today. And for considering the summer program. Single quotes, his father nodded, his gaze fixed on the distance. I've been thinking a lot about balance lately, security and freedom, protection and growth. He glanced down at Alexander. You've taught me something important these past months. Alexander looked up in surprise. What's that? That safety isn't just about walls and protocols. It's about having the skills and confidence to navigate uncertainty. Nathaniel placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. You're building those skills every time you venture beyond our gates. Every chess match, every new friendship. Every challenge you overcome. It was the most his father had shared of his evolving perspective, and Alexander absorbed the words carefully, recognizing their significance. I feel safer now than I ever did behind the walls, he admitted. Not because the world is less dangerous, but because I'm learning how to be part of it. That evening, after his friends had gone and the household had settled into its nighttime routine, Alexander found himself drawn to his old observation spot near the gate. The playground across the street was empty in the fading light, the swings moving gently in the spring breeze. For years, this view had represented everything beyond his normal childhood, friendship, belonging. He no longer needed to press against iron bars to glimpse these experiences. He carried them within him now. The exhilaration of capture the flag, the concentration of chess matches, the simple joy of lunchroom conversations. The lonely billionaire son with one leg had become something more. A friend, a teammate. A boy finding his place in the world one careful step at a time. As Alexander turned back toward the house that had once felt like a prison and now increasingly felt like a home, he noticed his father watching from the terrace. Their eyes met across the distance, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come and how far they still had to go. Alexander raised his hand in a small wave. After a moment, his father returned the gesture. It wasn't perfect. The security protocols remained. The fears lingered. The world still held dangers that most children never had to consider. But the wall that had once seemed impenetrable now had gates that opened, allowing passage in both directions out to friendship and normal experiences, and into the heart of a home being transformed by those very connections. Tomorrow, he would join his friends at school for chess club. This summer, he would experience his first camp at Lake Merritt. And someday, when the time was right, Alexander knew he would stand at those gates not as an observer or an outsider, but as a bridge between two worlds that never should have been separated in the first place.